train sufficiently on what to do when that system is a little bit wrong, kind of wrong, and how to overcome that. And really that comes with training, experience, and not trusting the system and always kind of checking up on that. And that's real easy to forget to leave out of the pilot's cross-check, crossing the ocean, going from Anchorage to Seoul. That's a long flight, and we tend to forget, maybe we push that button, and 9 times out of 10 when you're crossing the ocean, you press one button and it's going to intercept that Route 20 that's going to take you out of Soviet airspace. You push one button and forget about it. Fire and forget, if you will. And these pilots probably did that, and we can assume they did that based on automation bias studies in the past. They look at, well, I pressed that button 9 times out of 10, it gives me where I want to go. That 1 time out of 10, maybe I'm not checking it. I'm tired. I already flew out of New York. I'm not going to cross-check what my autopilot is doing, maybe the INS system and where it's putting us. So those pilots failed to cross-check what the computer was doing, cross-check the outputs of what the automation was giving them, and that resulted in them being hundreds and hundreds of miles off course. I put on the failed to see fighters overshoot. We talked about how those fighters took that evasive maneuver, that climb to a higher altitude for fuel conservation. They saw the evasive maneuver and had to overshoot a Boeing 747. Granted, that 747 probably doesn't have the best visibility as you look out the windows, but this is a routine thing crossing the oceans. They weren't looking outside as much as they could have been, and as a result, missed to see Soviet fighters flying around. They gave warning shots before they attacked and didn't see anything. So that's an issue. They're not looking outside. They're probably conversing on something. Really not 100% in the game, and how that that can always, and that's the worst time for a CRM issue is when tasks are low. There's not a lot going on, so that was definitely an issue here. Moving on to the next slide, slide 10. Talk about ATC, and this is really an environmental issue. Back in the 80s, we didn't really have a lot of radar coverage over the Pacific, and even today we don't. But because of that lack of radar, that those ATC controllers don't have a lot of SA, and it wasn't as precise as it is today, so they couldn't see that the 747 flew over the course they were supposed to fly on that 220 heading. They didn't intercept it as they were heading out over the Pacific, so maybe maybe better radar could have given the controls a little bit of SA, and they could have helped out. So they're unable to help with navigation. Tokyo air traffic control, and because of the environment, you're crossing the ocean, you don't have a lot of contact with many controllers. They didn't notice that they cleared a 747 to climb, even though there were some Soviet fighters in formation. There's a misspell there. Should have been a TN fighters, but there was no coordination between ATC. And although I'm just a FAPE and haven't flown across a lot of pond crossings in big aircraft, I know that now today it's better than it used to be. There's a lot of high frequency communication, a lot more going on. So that coordination has improved, maybe between Alaska and Tokyo. They're all talking about there's aircraft that are flying across the ocean. Maybe a little better coordination would have helped ATC to know that 747 is hundreds of miles off course. And the ocean, I mean, that's a huge expanse, and we don't expect radar coverage completely over that, but some coordination between American and Japanese air traffic control maybe could have saved the day here to prevent this aircraft from transitioning Soviet airspace, although that's not an issue now. Soviet transitioning or being off course to hundreds and hundreds of miles. We hope that we can prevent that with a little bit better technology that we have today. Next slide, it's talking about the 007, different crews. Lack of continuity, so you get crews switching from New York to Alaska and Alaska on their way to Seoul. You expect that at some point there was a lot of different pilots on board the aircraft. Somebody had switched places with somebody else. They're tired, so they're not at full capacity, if you will, to cross-check the instruments, see what's going on, kind of fall into that complacency. Definitely high risk for that, which is a CRM issue there. And then as they're switching crews on long sorties like this crossing the ocean, the new crews tend to assume that everything's just fine. no issues. The autopilot's going to take us across the Pacific Ocean, going to take us into Seoul and keep us out of Soviet airspace. So they never cross-checked, and that's something we can talk about with CRM, is always assuming when you take command or you take over a position that everything's wrong. Make sure everything makes sense. Because the 747 was equipped with an INS system, and more likely than not, although we'll never know, but more likely than not, that INS system would have been showing them off the prescribed course that they wanted to be on. But the human factors associated with the autopilot and not a lot of warnings to being off course, and just kind of assuming that everything's going right. Those pilots failed to recognize significant deviations. Moving on to Soviet CRM issues, we talked about the radar outage there. So your Soviet controllers for the last couple of days had a significant radar outage, and they felt this false sense of urgency due to that. You know, the U.S. has always been flying along the borders with RC-135, soaking up those electrons. And with the radar outage, you're kind of assuming the worst. They're fighting for their country as well, so they're trying to do the best they can to keep U.S. aircraft out of their airspace and make sure everything's that we're not intruding upon their sovereignty. So with the U.S. spy planes, the radar or lack of radar, you see an airplane out there, you have radar images from hundreds, maybe thousands of miles away, looking at this 747, easily confused with the spy plane. And what happened, you know, we talked about how they entered Soviet airspace, left Soviet airspace back into international airspace, and then back into Soviet airspace. So, and they're looking at this thing from hundreds of miles away. They feel this false sense of urgency. Command and control, the generals, the higher ups in Soviet command are watching this aircraft. Obviously came from Alaska. They're looking at its same kind of radar signature that the U.S. spy plane has gone into their airspace and transition their airspace, and now entered it again. So they're going to feel like something wrong is up, and that this aircraft has no right to be in their sovereign airspace. Moving on this, and to continue to talk about that, how you've got these fighters that are trying to get vectored on to what they thought was a spy plane, and it's hard to do without the radar, and they're trying and they're missing and they're nowhere near it. They're not picking up that visual contact for many miles, so you get that sense of urgency. These fighter pilots are trying their hardest to complete the mission, and they're unable to. So you get that kind of, the heart rate's up. They're trying to find this U.S. spy plane that's out there trying to invade their sovereignty, their rightful sovereignty. So because of that sense of urgency, I think that played into these generals given that command to launch the missiles that they ended up firing at this aircraft. So because of the lack of radar, which is something that we really can't change, it's an environmental issue, but they felt that sense of urgency. Hey, this airplane's in our airspace, we've got to do something about it. And that's why they shot it down, because these generals felt that pressure to do something, and obviously it wasn't the right call. We'll talk about some lessons learned here from the Korean Airlines side. Automation bias. This whole thing could have been prevented from a simple press of the autopilot button to intercept their INS course to keep them clear of Soviet airspace. Complacency is a high risk for pilots, and while they're switching crews, assuming that you're not correct, that something is going to be wrong, and making sure that everything's wrong could have saved the day in this case. And that long day, that fatigue, probably played an issue into these pilots switching out as they're crossing the ocean. It's a long time, many hours to be up there. Communication with air traffic control needs to be improved, both for the Soviets and even though it's not an issue anymore. Obviously, these commie bastards have moved on, but with America and Tokyo moving on, being able to transfer aircraft, more use of high-frequency communication, which can span the ocean, we've moved on from that, and being able to identify aircraft and unfortunately, we moved on from the Cold War, where hopefully and maybe in the future, and we'll never really know, but hopefully the situation can be prevented with a little bit of coordination between the countries. Better communication with ATC, better communication with twin aircraft. This is definitely proven to be a situation where that has improved, but we can always hope that this will never happen again. 220 lives were lost due to pilot error in the beginning, and Halcyon can affect that, obviously. We hope that nothing like this is ever going to happen again with technology, and that's going to bridge the gaps that were an issue in today's aviation world. And that's all I got. Any questions? I know there won't be any, but that's all I got. And hopefully that wasn't too long here. Stop that. Thanks, sir. That's it.